Hello everyone, here is Afra Syab. Today we are going to solve Cambridge IGCSE Physics Paper 4 Theory Extended, held on October-November 2017, and paper code is 0625 with variant 43. So let's start from question number 1. Here is question number 1. A truck accelerates uniformly along a straight horizontal road. The mass of truck is 2.0 into 10 to the power 4 kilogram. Part A. The speed of the truck increases from rest to 12 meter per second in 30 seconds. So here the truck starts from rest. It means that its initial velocity is equal to 0 and it gains a speed of 12 meter per second, which is the final velocity. And to gain this speed, the truck takes 30 seconds. Calculate part first, the distance travelled by the truck during this time. So here we have to find out the distance travelled by the truck during 30 seconds. For that we have to know about the formula which is used to calculate distance. So we know that average speed is equal to distance over time. I write here it is equal to distance divided by time. So here we have to find out the value of distance. So I write here distance is equal to average speed multiplied by time. So first of all we have to find out the value of average speed. So I write here, I mention it with symbolic form. D is equal to V average multiplied by time. Here we have to first of all find out the value of V average. It will be initial speed plus final speed divided by 2. Here I take the average of the speed and divide it by the total number of values of speed. So it will be equal to initial speed is basically 0 plus final speed is 12 meter per second divided by 2. So the value of average speed comes to be 6 meter per second. So it is the value of average speed. We have used this value and find out the distance. So I write here distance is equal to 6 multiplied by time is 30 seconds. So it is equal to 180 meters. Distance is equal to 180 meter. Part 2. The resultant force on the truck. Here we have to find out the value of resultant force. According to Newton's second law of motion, F is equal to ma, that is force is equal to product of the mass and acceleration. So first of all, speed is given but we don't know the value of acceleration. So in order to calculate the force, we have to find out the value of acceleration. So I use the definition of acceleration, which is equal to delta V over delta T, which is V minus U over T. Here V is final speed, U is initial speed and T is time. So by putting values here, I get 12 minus 0 divided by 2. So time is 30 seconds. So I write here 30. So it's the value of acceleration and it comes to be 0.45 meter per second square. The unit of acceleration is meter per second square. Next I am going to put this value in equation 1. So F is equal to, the value of mass is given at the start, which is 2.0 into 10 to the power 4 kilogram. 2.0 into 10 की power 4 multiplied by acceleration, which is 0.40, so that the value of force comes to be 8000 Newton. So I write here resultant force is equal to 8000 Newton. Part B. To maintain a uniform acceleration, the forward force on the truck must change. Explain why. So here we have to explain that why the forward force on the truck changes. So first of all, as the truck increases its speed, there is a force, that is air resistance, also acting on the truck. By increasing the speed, air resistance also increase. I write here, when I increase speed, air resistance also increase. And as the air resistance increases, the truck slows down. So the forward force must be increased in order to maintain the uniform acceleration. So I write here, as speed increases, air resistance also increases. Here air resistance is basically the opposing force. As air resistance increase, the truck slows down. So the forward force must be increased to maintain the uniform acceleration. So if I consider here that there is a truck, here it's a truck, as it moves forward, there is a opposing force that is acting in opposite direction. This is actually air resistance. So when the truck increases speed, the air resistance also increase. As air resistance is the opposing force, so it tries to slow down the truck. So when this tries to slow down the truck, in order to gain the uniform acceleration, the forward force must have to be increased. So that's why the forward force increase to maintain the uniform acceleration. Question number 2. Figure 2.1 shows a measuring cylinder that contains a colored liquid. Here is the figure 2.1 and we can see that there is a measuring cylinder and the volume of the liquid in this cylinder is shown. And this is basically equal to height h. There is also a point x that is mentioned here. The measuring cylinder contains 82 cubic centimeter of liquid. The density of liquid is 950 kg per meter cube. Part A. Calculate the mass of liquid. So here we have to find out the mass of liquid. We are given the volume and density. So first of all, writing the formula of density. I write here density is equal to mass per unit volume. So when we have to find out mass, it will be equal to density multiplied by volume. So first of all, here we can see that the volume is given 82 centimeter cube, and we have to convert this into meter cube because the unit of density is kilogram over meter cube. So we have to convert 82 centimeter cube into meter cube. So it will be volume is equal to 82 divided by 100 and its power 3. It is known in meters. I simply write it as V is equal to 82 into 10 की power minus 6. Here is meter cube because its unit is centimeter cube. So it will be meter cube. Now I am going to put values in this formula, that mass is equal to density and volume. So mass will be equal to density is given 950 multiplied by volume, that is 82 into 10 की power minus 6. So the value of mass comes to be 0.08 kilogram. I write here mass is equal to 0.08 kilogram. So it's the mass of the liquid whose density is 950 kilogram per meter cube. So here I will explain that why I convert centimeter cube into meter cube. Consider this formula that mass is equal to density and volume when density is measured in kilogram over meter cube and volume here is in centimeter cube. When I write here centimeter cube, both of these units, that is meter cube and centimeter cube, do not cancel with each other because the unit of mass is kilogram. So to get the unit of mass kilogram, first of all I convert the volume into meter cube when here is meter cube and the unit of density is kilogram over meter cube. So both of these cancels with each other and the unit of mass comes to be kilogram. So here is a part B. The height h of the liquid in the measuring cylinder is 0.094 meters. Part 1. Calculate the pressure due to the liquid at point X in figure 2.1. So here we have to find out the pressure due to the liquid at point X. So first of all, I write here formula that pressure is equal to density multiplied by value of G and height. So here we have to find out pressure where the density is given, which is 950. So I write here 950 multiplied by the value of G is 10 meter per second square. So here will be 10. So height is given, which is 0.094 meter. 0.094. So the value of pressure comes to be 893 Pascal. The unit of pressure is Pascal. So I write here pressure is equal to 893 Pascal. Moving towards the next part. Part 2. The true pressure at point X is different from the value calculated in B. Part first. Explain why. So the true pressure at a point X is different than the value that we calculate in the previous part. We have to explain its reason. Because in calculating the pressure here, we don't consider that atmospheric pressure. But there is also that atmospheric pressure around the cylinder. Here is the atmospheric pressure. So that's why both readings are different. I write here atmospheric pressure is also acting at top of liquid. Part C. A small object is made of steel. It is placed level with the top surface of the liquid in the measuring cylinder and then released. The object sinks in this liquid. Explain why the object sinks in this liquid. So first of all, here I consider a liquid. Here is liquid inside this. And I place a very small object in it. So this object sinks in this liquid. We have to explain its reason. So basically, the steel is more denser than the liquid. I write here, if the density of object that is made up of steel. I write here the density of steel is more than the density of liquid, then the object will sink. Here will sink. But if the density of steel is less than the density of liquid, then the object will float. In our case, the object sinks in the liquid. It means that the density of the object that is made up of the steel is larger as compared to the density of liquid. So I write here, because steel is more denser than liquid. Part 2. Describe how the volume of the object can now be measured. Now, in the part first we place our object in the liquid and then we have to find out volume. And we have to find out the volume of the object. How we can measure the volume of the object, because there is also the liquid in this cylinder. So first of all, when we place the object in the liquid, we have to take the new reading of volume. Say I suppose it is equal to V2, then this volume is basically the volume of both object and liquid. But here we have to find out just the volume of the object. It means that I write here volume of object plus liquid. But we have to find out the volume of object. That's why I subtract volume of liquid here to get the volume of object. So first step is that record the new reading of the volume. I say it is equal to V2 when the object was added and subtract 82 cubic centimeter from it, because the volume of liquid is 82 cubic centimeter. So it will be 82, which is equal to the volume of object. So I write here, record new reading of volume say V2 when object was added. And subtract 82 cubic centimeter from it. So in this way, we can find out the volume of the object. Question number 3. Figure 3.1 shows solar cells that use radiation from the sun to generate electricity. So solar cells are basically used to generate the electricity by getting radiation from the sun. Part A. First, state the name of the process which releases energy in the sun. So here we have to describe the name of process that is used to release energy in the sun. So this process is basically nuclear fusion. I write here nuclear fusion. In this process, small nuclei combines to give a large nucleus. I write here small nuclei combine to give large nucleus. So I write here this process is nuclear fusion. Part 2. A reaction takes place in the sun as energy is released. Describe what happens in this reaction. So here we have to describe what happens in the reaction that takes place in the sun as its energy is released. So first of all, in this reaction, 4 hydrogen nuclei combines to form of a helium nucleus because there is large amount of helium inside the sun. So I write here 4 hydrogen nuclei combines and it gives helium nucleus, that is helium 4 and 2. During this process, some amount of energy is released from the sun. So I write here 4 hydrogen nuclei combine to form helium nucleus. During this process, some amount of energy is released from the sun. Next, part B. Apart from solar cells, there are other energy resources used on Earth for which the radiation from the sun is the source. State the name of one of these energy resources and explain whether it is renewable. So these are fossil fuels, waves, wind, all of these sources are renewable because we can use them again and again. Or we can simply say that we can get energy from these resources again and again. So these sources are basically fossil fuels. I write here and wind. Both of these sources are renewable. Because we get energy from these sources again and again. Part C. State 2 advantages and 2 disadvantages of using solar cells to generate electricity. So here we have to state the 2 advantage and 2 disadvantage of using the solar cell to generate the electricity. So first of all, the solar cell do not cause pollution. It's the advantage of the solar cells. So I write here it does not cause any pollution and they can be placed on the roofs. So I write here they can be placed on roofs And second advantage is that solar cells do not cause pollution. So next we have to write the disadvantages of using the solar cell for the generation of electricity. So first of all, the initial cost is very high and they spread over long area and take more space. So in some houses there is no enough space that they can place the solar cell. So it's a disadvantage of the solar cell that it takes a large space. So I write here the initial cost is very high and they spread over large area. And take more space. So we also have to write the second disadvantage. So the solar cells produce DC power output and needs AC converter which is expensive. So I write here they produce DC power output and needs AC converter, that is alternating current. Which is expensive. So these are the advantage and disadvantage of using the solar cell to generate electricity. Question number 4, part A. The molecules of most liquids are on average slightly further apart than the molecules of the solid. State one other difference between the molecular structure of solids and liquid. So here we have to differentiate the structure of solid and liquid. So first of all, here I make the structure of solid. So we can see here that the molecules of solid are arranged in the form of a lattice and the molecules of liquid do not form a lattice because there is a large spacing between their molecules. So I write here the molecules of solid arranged in form of a lattice. Part B. A glass tube passes through a stopper and into a glass flask. Figure 4.1 shows that the flask is completely full of liquid and that there is also some liquid in the tube. So here is a figure 4.1. We can see that there is a glass flask that is filled with the liquid. And there is a glass tube that is passes through the stopper and also into the glass flask. There is also some liquid in this glass tube. The flask is immersed in large beaker of hot water. So we have placed this flask into a beaker that contains very hot water At the first, the level of the liquid in the tube falls, but after a short time it rises. Part 1. Explain why at first the level of the liquid in the tube falls. So first of all, I here make a large beaker and place the flask inside this. So first of all, this beaker is full of hot water like this. And when I place the flask in this beaker, then what will happen? At the first, the level of the liquid in the tube falls, but after some time it rises. So basically it is due to the reason that when this flask is kept into the beaker that contains hot water, it means that we provide heat to the glass flask. So when a liquid in the glass flask is heated, the heat first reaches to the glass flask and then it expands because there is an expansion when the temperature is increased. So when the heat reaches the glass flask, then it will expand. So the level of liquid initially drop down because when it expands, it will be like that. Its size may increase. So first of all, if I suppose that the level of liquid is at this point, then after expansion the level of liquid falls. So the reading will also be at the lower point. So I write here, when the liquid is heated, the heat first reaches to the glass flask and it expands. So the liquid level initially drops down. Next, part 2. Explain why the liquid level in the tube stops falling and start to rise. So after when the liquid level in the tube falls, after some time it stop falling and then it start to rise. So we have to explain its reason. When the liquid gets completely hot, which is inside the glass flask, then it will also expand further and rise up. The liquid warms up and expands more than the glass. So that's why the level starts to rise up. I write here, When liquid gets completely hot, then it expands further and rise up. The liquid warm up and expand more. Than the glass. So it's the basic reason that why the liquid level in the tube stop falling and then it start to rise. Question number 5. A silver spoon has a thermal capacity of 7.2 joule per degree C. Part A. Explain what is meant by the thermal capacity. So here we have to explain that what is meant by the thermal capacity. So thermal capacity is basically the amount of heat energy needed to raise the temperature of substance by 1 degree C. So it is basically the energy that is needed to increase the temperature of substance by 1 degree C. So I write here amount of energy, which is heat energy needed to raise temperature of substance by 1 degree C is called as thermal capacity. Part B. The silver spoon is dropped into a saucepan of boiling water. So the boiling point of water is basically temperature of 100 degrees C. The internal energy of the spoon increases as its temperature increases from 22 degrees C to 100 degrees C. Part 1. Calculate the increase in internal energy of the spoon. So here we have to find out the value of increase in internal energy. So using the formula that energy is basically equal to the product of thermal capacity, which is C, and change in temperature delta T. So here we have to find out the value of E, which is the increase in internal energy. So I put values here. The value of C is given, which is 7.2. So I write here 7.2 multiplied by change in temperature. So first of all, initial temperature is 22 degrees C and final temperature is 100 degrees C. So it will be change in temperature is 100 minus 22. So the increase in internal energy comes to be 561.6 joule. So it is the value of the increase in internal energy. I write here 561.6 joule. Part 2. State in terms of atoms what is meant by internal energy. So here we have to explain internal energy. Internal energy is basically the sum of total kinetic energy and the total potential energy of all molecules of a substance. So internal energy is basically equal to sum of kinetic energy and potential energy. I write here the sum of total kinetic energy and total potential energy of all molecules of a substance. Part C. The spoon is removed from the boiling water and immediately it begins to transfer energy to the surrounding. The temperature of surrounding is 22 degrees C. On figure 5.1, sketch a graph to show how the temperature of the spoon changes with the time from the instant that is removed from the water. So first of all, temperature is 100 degrees C because it's a boiling water and the temperature of boiling water is 100 degrees C. So the spoon is removed from the boiling water, then its temperature decreases and it is 22 degrees C. Because the temperature of surrounding is also 22 degrees C and when the spoon is removed from the boiling water, it transfers energy to the surrounding. So the surrounding temperature is 22 degrees C. So we have to draw a graph that how the temperature of the spoon changes with the time from the instant when it is removed from the water. So first of all, its initial temperature is 100 degrees C and then when we remove it, its temperature decreases and it becomes 22 degrees C. So I draw a line here using a ruler at 22. No, initial point is this and final point is on this line. We have to draw a graph. So it will be like that. So this graph basically shows that how the temperature of spoon changes with time. Question number 6. Visible light is one component of the electromagnetic spectrum. Part A. First, in the table, place a tick in the box next to the approximate value of the speed of light in air. So here we have to tick the box which shows the speed of light in the air. We know that speed of light is basically 3 into 10 की power 8 meter per second. Its value remains fixed. So I have to see here that first box is 3.0 into 10 की power 10. So it's 10 की power 10. That's why it is incorrect. Second box is 3.0 into 10 की power 8. So this box is actually the correct reading of the speed of light in air. Part 2. The frequency of the light wave is 4.8 into 10 की power 14 Hertz. Calculate the wavelength of this light in air. So we have to find out the wavelength of the light when frequency is given and the speed is again speed of light because the light wave travel with the speed of light. So using formula that is V is equal to F lambda, here we have to find out the value of wavelength that is lambda. It is equal to V over F. So V is basically 3.0 into 10 की power 8 meter per second and frequency is 4.8 into 10 की power 14, so that the value of wavelength comes to be 6.25 into 10 की power -7 meter. So I write here wavelength is equal to 6.25 into 10 की power -7 meters. Part B. Light is traveling in an optical fiber that is made of glass. Part 1. The glass has a refractive index of 1.5. First part, explain why the quantity refractive index does not have a unit. So we can see here that the value of refractive index of the glass is given and it does not have any unit. We have to explain that why the refractive index does not have unit. For that we have to know about that what is refractive index. So refractive index is basically the ratio of speed of sound in air to the speed in any medium. So the unit of speed, that is c, is meter per second, and also here it is meter per second. So both of these cancels and n do not have any unit. So refractive index does not have any unit. It is because of the reason that refractive index is the ratio of same quantity, that is speed. So I write here because it is the ratio of similar quantity. Next, part 2. Calculate the speed of light in the glass. Here we have to find out the calculate. Part 2. Calculate the speed of light in the glass. Here we have to find out the speed of light in glass. So using the definition of refractive index, n is equal to c over v. We know the value of c, that is 3 into 10 की power 8 meter per second. So refractive index of glass is also given and it is equal to 1.5. So I can easily find out the value of the speed of light, which is v is equal to c over n, where c is 3.0 into 10 की power 8 divided by n is 1.5. So that the value of v comes to be 2.0 into 10 की power 8 meter per second. So I write here speed is equal to 2.0 into 10 की power 8 meter per second. Part 2. Describe one use of optical fiber in communication technology. So here we have to describe the use of optical fiber. So the use of optical fiber in the telecommunication is that the signal that is sent along the optical fiber in the telecommunication system like telephone, it is in the infrared region of the electromagnetic spectrum. The electrical signal are converted into the pulses of infrared waves inside the fiber, which can be converted back into the electrical signal, and the light travels in the optical fiber by the total internal reflection. So I write here the signal that is sent along optical fiber in telecommunication system is in the infrared region of the electromagnetic spectrum. Here is electromagnetic spectrum. The electrical signals are converted into pulses of infrared inside the fiber. Which can be converted back into electrical signals. So in this way, we can use optical fiber in telecommunication system. Question number 7, part A. Figure 7.1 shows a converging lens and its principal axis. The points F1 and F2 are principal focuses of the lens. So in figure 7.1 we can see that there are 2 points F1 and F2. These are principal focus, and there is also a straight line that is horizontal. This line is basically known as principal axis, and object is placed very close to the converging lens, and this object is placed between the F1 and the center of the lens. An object O is placed between F1 and lens. Part 1. On figure 7.1, draw 2 rays from the top of object O to locate the image. Label the image I. So going back to figure, here we have to locate the image I. So first of all, we have to draw the rays. First ray is stacked parallel to the principal axis, and after refraction by the lens, it passes through the focus point. I write here ray 1 parallel to the principal axis, and after refraction by lens, it passes through focus point, that is F2. Now I am going to draw the first ray using a ruler. First of all, this ray is parallel to the principal axis like that. No, here it is refracted by the lens and passes through the F2 point. It will be like this. So this is the path of the first ray. Second ray is that passing through the center of lens and goes straight forward. It does not deviate. I write here second ray passes through center of lens and goes straight. Now I am going to draw the second ray. So it's the second ray. We can see that both of these rays diverges. They do not focus at a single point. So I extend them in backward direction and find the point where image is formed. So extending them in backward direction, I also have to extend the second ray. The point where both of these rays intersect is actually the position of image, and we have to label it with I. So this is image I. Going towards the next part. Part 2. The object O is moved to the left along the principal axis so that it is further from the lens than F1. Figure 7.2 is the diagram of the new arrangement with new image shown. So, underline 3 of the terms below that describe the image shown in figure 7.2. First is diminished, enlarged, inverted, real, same size, upright and virtual. So first of all, here again I draw the rays and form the image. Then I will tell that either the image is virtual or real, diminished or enlarged, or it is inverted or upright. So I am going to draw these rays. First ray is again parallel to principal axis. And after refraction by the lens, it passes through focus point. Like that, it is the path of the first ray. Second ray is that passing through the center of lens. And then it forms the image. So we can see that it's the image. First of all, we compare the size of the object and size of image. The size of object is this one, like the size of image is this. We can see that the size of image is larger as compared to size of object. It means that image is enlarged. I underline here, enlarge. Second thing is that we can see the object is in upward direction while the image is in downward direction. So this image is inverted. So I take here inverted. And last thing is that this image can be projected onto the screen. So it's a real image. Here it is real. So these are the properties of the image formed when the object is placed behind the focus point. Next part B. Figure 7.3 shows yellow light passing through the glass prism. Here is a figure 7.3 and we can see that there is a yellow light that is passing through the prism. Blue light enters the prism along the same path as the yellow light. On figure 7.3, draw the path of the blue light as it enters passes through and leaves the prism. So here we have to draw the path for the blue light. First of all, I write here yellow and blue, and I compare wavelength. The wavelength of the yellow light is larger as compared to blue light. So as the wavelength of the blue light is smaller, so in the case of blue light, there will be more bending. And here are two medium. First one is air, that is outside of prism, and inside here is a prism, that is glass prism. So when a ray of light passes from air into glass, it means that the ray of light passes from rare to denser medium because the density of glass is larger as compared to air. So the ray will bend towards the normal. I write here, when ray enters from rare to denser medium, it bends towards normal. And when this ray enters from denser into rare medium, it bends away from normal. So using this concept, I am going to draw these rays. First of all, I draw a normal. So it is the normal to the surface of prism. Next thing is that we have to draw the path for the blue light. So when this blue light enters into the prism, then it will bend towards the normal line, and there will be more bending in the case of blue light. So I am going to draw its path. It will be like that. So this ray is inside the prism. We also have to trace the path of this ray outside the prism. Now again I draw the normal ray here at this point. And we observe that the ray of light in this case enters from glass into air. So this ray will bend away from the normal. I am going to draw its path. So it bends away from normal like that. So this is the path of the blue light as it comes out of the prism. Question number 8, part A. Figure 8.1 shows an uncharged conducting sphere on an insulating stand placed close to the positively charged rod. So here is a figure 8.1. You can see that there is a insulating stand, and above which we place a conducting sphere which is uncharged. There is also a positively charged rod that is very close to the conducting sphere. The rod and the sphere are not moved. Describe how to charge the sphere using a wire connected to earth and explain whether the sphere become positively charged or negatively charged. So first of all, we have to connect the conducting sphere with the earth wire. So first of all, I make earth wire here. So in the first step, I connect the conducting sphere with the earth wire. The electron flows from the earth to the conducting sphere. So there will be electron that is negatively charged, which flows from earth into the conducting sphere. Now when the electron transfer to the conducting sphere, we have removed the wire, that is earth wire, or we can simply say that we have to disconnect the earth. So I erase this one, and also takes away the rod from the sphere. So we can simply say that there is electrons on the conducting sphere. So I write here, when we touch the sphere with earth wire, then the electrons flow from earth to the sphere. In the next step, disconnect the earth wire and remove positively charged rod away from the sphere. So here is part B. Figure 8.2 shows a small black circle that represents a positive charge. So this circle is basically positive charge. On figure 8.2, draw the pattern and the direction of the electric field in the region around the charge. So first of all, we can see here that it's a positive charge and the electric field lines from the positive charge emerges. So when I have to draw the pattern, I have to draw the lines and put arrow in outward direction. So I'm going to draw these lines using a ruler. So the electric field lines due to positive charge will points outward. So this arrow basically shows the direction of electric field lines. Part C. A charge of 7.0 coulomb flows along a wire in 5.0 minutes. Calculate the current in the wire. So here we have to find out the current in the wire when the value of charge and time is given. So using the definition of current, that current is the flow of charges. I simply write here current I is equal to rate of flow of charges Q over T. So charges is given, that is 7.0 coulomb and time is 5.0 minutes. So first of all, we have to convert minutes into second. It will be 5.0 multiplied by 60 seconds. So I write here 5.0 into 60. So it will be equal to 0.0 023 ampere. The unit of current is ampere. So I write here current is equal to 0.023 amperes. Question number 9, part A. Figure 9.1 shows the structure of an alternating current generator. So here is a figure 9.1, and we can see that there is the alternating current generator. The main components of AC generator is slip rings, coil, and magnetic field, that is represented by south and north pole. So the coil completes one rotation every 0.020 seconds. Part 1. Using the axis in figure 9.2, sketch a graph to show how the voltage output of the generator varies with time during a period of 0.040 seconds. So first of all, here we can see that the coil completes one rotation in 0.020 seconds. And in the part 1, we have to sketch the graph to show how the voltage output of the generator varies with time during a period of 0.040 seconds. So again, time is 0.040 seconds. It means that 2 rotations completed in 0.040 seconds. So here the voltage output is mentioned along the y-axis, and the time is taken along the x-axis, and it is measured in seconds. So here we have to draw the graph for the voltage output. The voltage output of the generator is sine or cosine wave. But here I draw sine wave. So sine wave shape is like that. I have to draw from this point to this point. One rotation is complete. So I have to draw this part in first 0.020 seconds. Now I am going to draw this. So it is a wave in first 0.02 second when one rotation is complete. Next we also have to draw the second wave. Now I am going to draw the second one. So it's the second wave when 2 rotations complete and time is 0.040. It means that output voltage of the generator is shown here when 2 rotations completed. Next, part 2. On your graph in figure 9.2, mark a point labeled A to indicate a time when the coil is vertical. So when the coil is in vertical position, we have to mark a point on the graph. So at the vertical position, the output voltage is 0. So I mark this point here and label it with A. It is the point where the coil is in vertical position, because when the coil is in vertical position, the output voltage is 0. Going towards the next part. Part B. There is an alternating current AC in a horizontal wire that is buried in a wall. A builder must miss this wire when drilling a hole in the wall. The builder places an instrument against the wall that registers a reading when it is close to the wire. The instruments include a long coil, which is solenoid S, that has an iron core and a sensitive voltmeter. Figure 9.3 shows the circuit of the instruments close to the wire. So here is a figure 9.3. We can see that there is the alternating current in this wire and also solenoid in which voltmeter is connected, and there is also the iron core in the solenoid. Part 1. explain why there is a reading on the voltmeter. So first of all, we can see here the voltmeter is connected across the solenoid. So the basic function of voltmeter is to measure the potential difference. I write here the voltage is measured by the voltmeter. So how this voltage is created? First of all, we can see here there is a wire in which alternating current is passing. When the alternating current passing through the wire, there will be the magnetic field. So I write here there will be the alternating magnetic field. This magnetic field cuts the solenoid. So some of these lines are also passing through the solenoid, due to which the magnetic field cuts the solenoid and there will be the induced voltage in the solenoid. This induced voltage is basically measured by using the voltmeter. So I write here magnetic field is formed due to alternating current. Changing magnetic field, that is alternating magnetic field, cuts the solenoid the voltage is induced in the solenoid which can be read from the voltmeter. Part 2. State the name and the effect of the component labeled X in figure 9.3. So here is a figure 9.3 and there is a component X. We have to tell the name of this component. This component is basically diode and it is used to allow flow of current in one direction only. So I write here it is diode and it allows to flow current in one direction only. Question number 10, part A. State the nature of gamma rays. Here we have to describe the nature of gamma rays. So first of all, gamma rays are neutral. They don't have any charge and these rays are just like the electromagnetic rays. These are very energetic rays. The energy is very high and shorter wavelength, because energy and wavelength are inversely proportional to each other according to this relation. So when the gamma rays has high energy, the wavelength will be shorter. I write here gamma rays are electromagnetic rays with no charge. These rays has short wavelength and high energy. Part B. A nucleus of technetium-99 whose symbol is Tc with atomic number 43 and mass number 99 emits only a gamma rays. State any fact of this on Part 1. The proton number of the nucleus. So first of all, atomic number of Tc is given, which is 43. The number of proton basically equal to atomic number. So when Tc 43 and 99 emits gamma rays, there will be no effect on the mass number or atomic number, because gamma rays actually emits to change the unstable element into stable one. So it remains same. Here will be 99 and 43. So the number of proton is basically equal to the atomic number, that is 43. So I write here there will be no change in the atomic number of nucleus. It remains same. So I write here no change in the proton number. Part 2. The nucleon number of the nucleus. Here it's a nucleon number. Nucleon number is basically the sum of number of protons plus neutron, which is also be known as mass number, and it is represented by A. Here 99 is basically the mass number, which is also be called nucleon number. It remains same when technetium emits gamma rays. So I write here there will be no change in the nucleon number. So it remains same. Next part C. In a laboratory, a radiation detector displays a count rate of 16 counts per minute due to background radiation. So the background count is 16 counts per minute. Part 1. State what is meant by background radiation. So what is the background radiation? These are the radiation due to the environment in the absence of any radioactive sample. So I write here the radiation due to environment in the absence of any radioactive sample. Is called background radiation. Part 2. A sample of radioactive isotope is placed near to the radiation detector and a count rate 112 count per minute is recorded. After 18 hours, the count rate recorded is 28 counts per minute. Calculate the half-life of this isotope. Here in this part we have to calculate the half-life. First of all, the background count rate is 16 count per minute. When we place a radioactive isotope near the sample, the count rate increases and it becomes 112 counts per minute. And after 18 hours, the count rate also decreases and it becomes 28 counts per minute. For this whole situation, we have to find out the half-life of this isotope. So first of all, I write here count rate will be equal to the count rate when we place the radioactive sample. It is 112 counts per minute and the background count rate, that is 16. So it will be 16. The count rate comes to be 96. So next time is given, that is 18 hours. After 18 hours, total count rate is 28 counts per minute. It means that this count rate basically is the sum of background count rate plus some other count rate when there is a radioactive isotope. So I write here, after 18 hours, count rate, that is final count rate, it will be equal to 28. So basically this 28 counts per minute is equal to, here is count per minute, background count rate plus radioactive isotope count rate. It will be 16, that is due to the background radiation, plus here I write x. So which number I place here so that the total count rate becomes 28 count per minute. Here will be 12. So x is basically equal to 12. It means that after 18 hours, the count rate remains 12, that is due to the radioactive isotope. So it is the count rate due to radioactive isotope that remains after 18 hours. So first of all, I write here, initially the radioactive isotope has count rate 112 and the background radiation count rate is 16. So the count rate is initially 96 and we have to find out first of all the total number of half-lives. So half-life is a time during which half of the sample decay. So when first half-life pass, half of this amount of radioactive isotope decay, it will be 48. So here one half-life pass. When second half-life pass, half of this amount decays, it will be 24. Here two half-life pass. But when third half-life pass, half of this amount remains, that is 12. It means that here 3 half-life passes. 3 half-life passes to decrease the count rate from 96 to 12. Total number of half-life is equal to 3. So using the formula that total number of half-life is equal to total time divided by half-life. Total time is 18 hours. Using this I find out half-life. It will be equal to total time is 18 hours and the total number of half-lives are 3. So it will be 6 hours. It means that half-life is equal to 6 hours. Next part D. A radioactive isotope are stored in thick lead containers. State 2 precautions to be taken when the radioactive isotopes are used. So radioactive isotopes are very dangerous and they should be stored in the thick lead containers. First precaution is that use the tongue to keep enough distance. I write here, use tongues to keep enough distance. And second precaution is that use lead gloves. Lead suits and lead glass. Screen to avoid absorption. So the second precaution is that we have to use the lead gloves, lead suit and lead glass screen to avoid the absorption.